In this next chapter, controlling spline IK, we're going to look at actually how to control a bit more of our spine itself, the spline that controls the spine, and then controlling the bone system with that spline. To further look at how we're controlling the spline, you'll actually find that there's a sweet spot in every character as to where these two objects should be to control the flex in the middle of the back, as well as the orientation, the constraint values for the position constraint on these two objects. Show you what I mean. I'll take these two and unlink them. Move this object, say, to about here somewhere, and then relink our system back up. You'll see that when I rotate it, I get a completely different solution than what I did before. Don't forget, this object is moving on a positional change based on the constraint of this between these two and where this is rotating around this object. So it usually just takes a little bit of fiddling around to find out what might work best for this specific character. Each time, though, you have to unlink these objects and then relink them back up again, or else you'll be moving your spline into a new location, and we don't want to do that. Find whatever works best for your character, because every character is going to be different. In this case, this seems to be working pretty good now. We could have also added another vertex in the spline down here, so that this one, when rotated, would have pulled the tailbone out a little bit. I haven't done it in this case, just to keep it simpler, so that we're not having to mess with too many point helpers. It might just make it confusing for this demonstration. Just about anything is possible, though. The next stage is setting up the bones so that they follow the spline. The way we're going to do this is the same way you set up a stretchy bone in Max. And just to demonstrate how a stretchy bone works, I'm just going to use a one bone chain. And I'm going to use 2 point helpers. The way it works is this. So you take the first bone in the chain and you position constrain it to the first point helper. You take the child bone and you position constrain it to the second point helper, and you'll notice it's actually broken the chain. When I move this point helper, you'll notice that the bone is changing length, but it's not pointing at the helper or at its root bone or its child bone like it's supposed to. To get around this, I'm going to simply apply a look at constraint and have it look at that second point helper as well. Now you have a stretchy bone set up that you could use for just about anything, including muscles. You pick the bone and open your bone tools under animation. Character bone tools. You can even change the properties of the bone and make it squash so that it squashes and stretches. We're not going to want squash and stretch on the spine, but we certainly are going to want it to stretch when we stretch out the spline. To take that procedure now, we're going to make it a little different. We're going to use more point helpers. This time I'm going to set the axis tripod on. Make it a little smaller maybe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set each of these point helpers now on a path constraint going up the path. And I want to set 5 of them, one for each bone. Go to my constraints, path constraint, constrain the first one to the very base. If you'll notice, the first thing that Max does is it animates the path constraint. I'm going to go and kill the animation on it so that we have no animation on the spine. Then I'm going to make copies of it to approximately where each bone is going to come to. The last helper should be at 100%. Those new point helpers now will move along with the spline and stretch with it. We can now use those to control the stretch of the spline, the bones on the spline. Using the exact same system I showed you with the one bone chain for a stretchy bone, I'm going to do this with this whole chain. So starting with the root, constraints, position constrain it. I'm then going to make it, just going to go all the way up the whole chain and position constrain each one and not worry that the bones will come apart on me a bit. Oops. Position constraint. And then I'm going to go set my look-at constraints on each joint. And you'll notice that it spins and flips around. We can actually change how that is set up by changing what the source axis is to get to flip back by playing with the flip and the different source axes until you get it the right way around. I also don't like the way the view length absolute line just kind of goes on forever, so I tend to turn it off completely. I turn down the length and I turn off it entirely. To the next one, and it's flipping the wrong way around again, so I'm going to change it to Y and flip. I think it was Y and flip, looked like it worked. Next one on the chain, turn off the view line. And I can set it the same again if I like. So now what you have is you have a set of bones that are position constrained to each of the point helpers that are along the path. And they are also looking down the chain to each one. Now when I pull and adjust the spline, you can see that the bones themselves are actually moving with it. And they will actually stretch as the spline gets longer as well. When I rotate the control, it'll rotate, bend, and flex the bone chain as well. The only thing we don't have control over here is much of a twist. You can actually see this bone here currently flipping over as I twist it around, flipping around uncontrollably. Right now we have absolutely no control on the orientation of each bone, the actual twist around the bone. Because we've used look-at constraints, we can get that control though by setting an up node. Right now it's set to world, which is very much what a camera is set to. As the camera finally points down in the scene, it'll flip over to try and keep itself up the right way. This means that we're going to have bones flipping all over the place as they go from one axis to another through world space. What we need to do is we need to actually set an up node, a specific thing for it to look at, so that it doesn't do that. We'll be handling that in the next chapter.